My name is Kelsey, and I am 31 years old. I stood in the grand foyer of my parents' Greenwich mansion as a black plastic garbage bag skidded across the imported marble floor and violently hit my boots. My father was screaming at the top of his lungs, demanding that I get out and stay out. He called me a worthless medical school dropout who was embarrassing our wealthy family. What he did not know was that I was quietly worth $50.5 million, and the cell phone in my pocket held the power to destroy his entire empire. Before I tell you how I went from being thrown out like trash to moving into a Manhattan penthouse the very next day, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The crystal chandeliers above us seemed to vibrate with the force of my father William shouting. It was supposed to be a night of elegant celebration. My younger sister Isabella was celebrating her engagement to a prominent corporate lawyer. The mansion was packed with Connecticut high society hospital board members and wealthy investors holding flutes of expensive champagne. I had only been in the room for 5 minutes. I had received a generic email invitation and naively thought this might be an olive branch, a chance to reconnect after 6 years of cold silence. Instead, I was met with a literal bag of trash. "Get out and stay out!" William roared, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "I told you 6 years ago that if you quit medical school, you were no longer a daughter of mine. How dare you show your face here tonight looking like a street beggar? You are a disgrace to the Kensington General Hospital legacy." The music from the string quartet in the corner screeched to a halt. Hundreds of eyes turned to stare at me. I looked down at the black garbage bag. Through a tear in the thin plastic, I could see the familiar fabric of my old winter coats. He had actually taken the time to dig my old belongings out of the attic just to use them as a prop for this public humiliation. I did not cry. 6 years ago, when he cut off my tuition and threw me out of the house for choosing to study computer science instead of medicine, I had cried until I could not breathe. But tonight I just felt a deep, icy calm settling over my heart. Isabella stepped forward from the crowd, her hand wrapped tightly around the arm of her fiancé, Jamal. Isabella was 29 years old and had just completed her surgical residency. She was wearing a custom silk gown that probably cost more than most people earn in a year. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure disgust, her nose wrinkling, as if my mere presence was polluting the air she breathed. "Honestly, Kelsey, you have a lot of nerve coming here," Isabella sneered, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. "Jamal is a senior partner at his law firm. His family flew in from the East Coast tonight. Do you really think he wants to introduce his relatives to my failure of a sister who works some minimum wage data entry job? Grab your garbage and leave before you ruin my perfect night." Jamal shifted uncomfortably beside her. He was a tall, striking African-American man with a sharp, intelligent gaze. Unlike my family, he did not look angry or disgusted. He looked deeply unsettled by the cruelty unfolding in front of him. He gently pulled his arm back a fraction of an inch and murmured something to Isabella, but she ignored him completely, basking in the cruel spotlight she had created. "I am not here to ruin anything, Isabella," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I received an invitation. I came to offer my congratulations and perhaps see if time had changed anything. Clearly it has not." "You received an automated mailing list email, you idiot, my mother," Catherine snapped, pushing her way to the front of the crowd. Catherine was 60 years old, but spent thousands of dollars a month to look 40. She clutched her pearl necklace, glaring at me as if I were a disease she might catch. We would never intentionally invite a dropout to an event of this caliber. William and I have spent our entire lives building our reputation in this community. We are medical royalty. You threw all of that away to play on computers like a child. I looked at my mother, feeling a strange sense of pity for her shallow existence. "I did not throw anything away, Mother. I chose a different path. A path that actually builds the future of healthcare instead of just profiting off it. I chose to create something meaningful rather than riding on the coattails of a hospital title." William let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "The future of healthcare. Listen to yourself. You are 31 years old and you have absolutely nothing. You own nothing. You are nothing. I am the chief of surgery and a board director at Kensington General. Isabella is a brilliant surgeon who is going to take my place one day. What exactly have you contributed to the world, Kelsey? Have you fixed a single computer that actually saved a life? The sheer arrogance of his words was almost comical. He had no idea what I had been doing for the past 6 years. He did not know about the countless nights I spent teaching myself advanced coding while eating instant ramen. He did not know about the artificial intelligence algorithms I had developed to predict patient risks and streamline medical diagnoses. He definitely did not know that my company, Aegis Health Tech, had just received a massive valuation from Wall Street investors. But I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a defensive explanation. I did not need to justify my existence to people who measured human worth in titles and bank account balances. My silence seemed to infuriate my father even more. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. Catherine stepped closer to William, crossing her arms defensively. If you do not pick up that bag and walk out that door right this second, I am calling the neighborhood security to have you escorted off the premises, she threatened, her voice sharp and brittle. You will not humiliate Jamal and his wonderful family with your pathetic presence for one more minute. You have always been the dark cloud over this family, Kelsey. I glanced at Jamal again. He was watching me intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. As a corporate lawyer, he was trained to read people and situations. I could tell he sensed that something about this dynamic was entirely off. He stepped slightly away from Isabella, clearing his throat to interject. Isabella, maybe we should just step into the other room. Jamal suggested, his deep voice calm, but carrying a note of quiet authority. There is no need to escalate this further. It is a family matter and we have guests watching. Let us just take a breath. This is not family, Jamal William barked, cutting him off abruptly. Family protects the legacy. Family honors the sacrifices I have made to build this empire. This woman is a stranger to me. She is a squatter in our presence. I want her gone right now. I bent down slowly and picked up the heavy black garbage bag. The plastic stretched under the weight of the coats inside, making a crinkling sound that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet foyer. The entire room watched in breathless silence, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to beg or apologize or run away crying. But I just adjusted my grip on the bag and stood incredibly tall. I am leaving, I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room, ensuring every single guest heard me. You do not have to worry about me ever returning to this house or asking you for anything. Good, Isabella spat, flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. Go back to your miserable little apartment and stay out of our lives forever. Enjoy typing numbers into spreadsheets for the rest of your pathetic life while I save lives and build a real future. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile that caused my mother to take a hesitant step backward. I looked directly into my father's eyes, stripping away the last remaining shreds of respect I had for the man who raised me. The man who cared more about a medical degree than his own flesh and blood. Enjoy your party, William, I said softly. But when you go to your office on Monday morning, you might want to call your accounting department. I hear Kensington General is about to miss a very large interest payment on its corporate debt. It would be a shame if the board found out their chief of surgery was driving the hospital into bankruptcy while throwing lavish parties. William's face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. His jaw dropped and the champagne flute in his hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of golden liquid onto the marble floor. For a split second the mask slipped, and I saw the sheer terror of a man whose deepest, darkest secret had just been spoken aloud. Before he could recover enough to speak, or demand to know how I possessed such confidential financial information, I turned on my heel and walked out the heavy oak front doors, letting them slam shut behind me. The crisp night air felt amazing against my skin. I walked down the long paved driveway, leaving the mansion, the cruelty and the toxicity behind me forever. As I reached the street and pulled out my phone to request a ride, I felt a rush of pure adrenaline. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully humiliated the family scapegoat and protected their precious image. They had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. My father thought he was the most powerful person in that room. He thought his hospital was his untouchable kingdom. He did not know that my company had just quietly purchased 51% of Kensington General's toxic debt. He did not know that the dropout he just threw out like garbage was now his biggest creditor. And most importantly, he did not know that the brilliant corporate lawyer his favorite daughter was about to marry was going to be the exact instrument of his ultimate destruction. The game had just begun, and I held all the winning cards. The very next morning, the sun rose over the spectacular skyline of Lower Manhattan, casting a brilliant golden light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new penthouse in Tribeca. The space was an absolute masterpiece of modern architecture, spanning 3 massive floors with a private rooftop terrace that offered unobstructed views of the Hudson River. I had closed the deal entirely in cash just 3 days prior, dropping exactly $50.5 million without breaking a single sweat. As I stepped off my private glass elevator and walked into the sprawling, open-concept living room, my heels clicked rhythmically against the imported Italian hardwood floors. I was holding the exact same black plastic garbage bag my father William had violently thrown at me the night before. I gently placed the torn bag onto a custom-designed white leather sofa right in the center of the immaculate room. The sheer contrast between that pathetic pile of discarded winter coats and the breathtaking luxury surrounding it was the most poetic representation of my entire life journey. 6 years ago, my family treated me like absolute garbage for choosing algorithms over anatomy. Now I was standing in the fortress of my own making, surrounded by wealth that my father could not even begin to comprehend. My penthouse was not just a home, it was a highly secure tech-integrated command center. With a single vocal command, the smart glass windows tinted to block out the harsh morning glare, and a massive holographic display descended from the ceiling. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee from the automated espresso bar and sat down at my sleek obsidian desk. I brought up the financial dashboard for Aegis Health Tech, the artificial intelligence company I had built from nothing but sheer determination and a stolen laptop. My software was originally designed to analyze vast amounts of complex patient data to predict and prevent critical medical emergencies. But over the last 2 years, I had expanded the algorithm's capabilities into the financial sector, specifically targeting the massive administrative waste and corrupt billing practices crippling the American healthcare system. That was how I found the rotting core of Kensington General Hospital. My father loved to boast about his prestigious title as chief of surgery and his seat on the board of directors. He constantly paraded his wealth around Connecticut, hosting lavish charity galas and bragging to high society elites. What William desperately hid from the public was the undeniable fact that Kensington General was bleeding money at an alarming rate. Their operational costs were astronomical. Their patient billing was a disorganized nightmare, and the hospital had taken on multiple high-interest corporate loans just to keep the lights on and the champagne flowing in the executive suites. The hospital was technically suffocating under a mountain of toxic debt. When the major investment banks started looking to quietly offload those high-risk loans, my company swooped in. Using a web of anonymous shell corporations and strategic proxy buyers, Aegis Health Tech systematically purchased 51% of Kensington General's outstanding corporate debt. I did not just have a seat at their table, I owned the entire building. My father thought he was the undisputed king of his medical empire, but he was actually just a puppet dancing on strings that I completely controlled. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me in the reality of my absolute power. The financial projection models glowing on my holographic screen confirmed that Kensington General was exactly 4 days away from a catastrophic default. They had a massive interest payment due by the end of the business week, and their liquid cash reserves were completely depleted. William and the rest of the board members were currently scrambling in absolute panic, desperately trying to find a lifeline. They needed to negotiate a restructuring deal with their primary creditor or face immediate hostile bankruptcy. They needed to negotiate with me. But they had absolutely no idea that the anonymous billionaire CEO they were searching for was the exact same woman they had just banished from their home. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a sharp ringing sound echoing through the expansive living room. It was not my personal cell phone. It was the highly encrypted corporate line designated strictly for the chief executive officer of Aegis Health Tech. Very few people in the world had the authorization to dial that specific number. I walked over to the desk and tapped the glowing green icon on the touchscreen console, routing the audio directly through the penthouse's surround sound speakers. I did not say a word. I simply waited for the caller to speak first. "Good morning," the deep, resonant voice echoed through the room. "I am calling on behalf of the Executive Board of Kensington General Hospital. My name is Jamal, and I serve as their external corporate counsel. I was given this secure number by your investment banking division. Am I speaking with the Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Health Tech?" I froze for a fraction of a second. A sharp thrill of anticipation rushed through my veins. It was Jamal, my sister Isabella's handsome, brilliant fiancé, the African-American corporate lawyer who had watched my family humiliate me just 12 hours ago. The man who had gently tried to de-escalate the situation before my father viciously shut him down. Jamal was highly respected in the legal world, known for his sharp intellect and unshakable ethical standards. My father had obviously hired him to clean up this massive financial mess, leveraging Jamal's corporate expertise to try and save his sinking ship. William was using his future son-in-law to do his dirty work, completely unaware that he was sending him directly into a perfectly designed trap. "You are speaking with the CEO," I replied, carefully utilizing a vocal modulation software I had programmed myself. The algorithm slightly lowered the pitch of my voice, masking my identity, with a smooth, professional tone that revealed absolutely nothing. "How can I help you, Jamal? I appreciate you taking my call directly." Jamal said, his tone respectful but layered with an underlying sense of urgency. "I am contacting you to urgently request a formal sit-down meeting regarding the debt portfolio your firm recently acquired. The hospital board is prepared to offer highly favorable restructuring terms. We are looking to establish a mutually beneficial partnership rather than a hostile financial takeover. Kensington General has a long-standing legacy of medical excellence in Connecticut, and we believe we can reach an agreement that protects your investment while allowing the hospital to maintain its vital operations." I leaned back in my leather chair, smiling at the sheer irony of his words. A long-standing legacy of medical excellence. That was the exact lie my parents sold to the world while hiding their toxic behavior behind closed doors. They desperately wanted to protect their legacy by begging the very person they had actively tried to destroy. I could hear the subtle stress in Jamal's voice. As a brilliant corporate lawyer, he knew the numbers did not lie. I knew Kensington General was in deep trouble, and he was trying to play a losing hand with as much dignity as possible. He was trying to protect a family that did not even deserve his immense talent. "A mutually beneficial partnership," I repeated, letting the modulated voice carry a hint of cold amusement. "That is an interesting proposition, counselor. From my analysis, Kensington General is severely mismanaged. Your operational overhead is bloated, and the executive compensation packages are entirely disconnected from reality. Why should Aegis Health Tech negotiate when we can simply force a default and liquidate your assets?" There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. Jamal was clearly calculating his next move, navigating the treacherous waters of corporate negotiation. "I understand your position," he finally said, his voice remaining incredibly steady. "The financial reports present a challenging picture. However, there is immense intrinsic value in the hospital operations and its dedicated medical staff. A liquidation would trigger catastrophic job losses and severely impact patient care across the state. We are prepared to bring our chief of surgery and our top executives to your headquarters in Manhattan to present a comprehensive turnaround strategy. We just need an audience with you. We just need a chance to prove our commitment to fixing these issues." I was practically begging on behalf of a man who treated everyone like dirt. William must have been terrified to send his future son-in-law to make this very desperate plea. I looked at the black garbage bag sitting on my pristine white couch. They wanted an audience. They wanted a chance to save their precious reputation. They were about to walk blindly right into the mouth of the lion's den. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. For a long, terrifying moment, nobody breathed. Isabella stared at me with her mouth hanging open, completely forgetting the arrogant insult she had just thrown my way. William looked as though he had been physically struck. His eyes darted frantically around the opaque glass walls, trying to find some logical explanation for how his disgraced dropout daughter had just seized control of a multi-million-dollar negotiation. Jamal was the first person to recover his professional composure, but I could easily see the profound shock radiating from his rigid posture. He looked down at the biometric scanner embedded in the table, and then looked directly into my eyes, finally connecting the scattered pieces of the puzzle. Kelsey, my father. William finally managed to speak, his voice sounding incredibly hollow and weak. What kind of sick, twisted prank is this? How did you get in here today? Who let you into this highly secure room right now? I leaned back into my plush leather executive chair and folded my hands calmly on the polished obsidian table. This is no prank, William, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and dangerously quiet. I am the sole founder and the chief executive officer of Aegis Health Tech. I own this entire building. I wrote the complex artificial intelligence software that currently powers this firm. And as of 72 hours ago, I own exactly 51% of Kensington General Hospital's corporate debt. I am your majority creditor. I own you. The blood drained entirely from my father's face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. He collapsed heavily into his seat, rubbing his chest as if he was experiencing acute physical pain. He was a man who had spent his entire life dominating every room he entered, but now he was utterly powerless. But William was a malignant narcissist, and narcissists do not stay down for very long. Within seconds, his initial shock morphed back into that familiar, demanding arrogance that had plagued my entire childhood. His posture straightened, he adjusted his designer suit jacket, and he slammed his hand flat against the glass table. He believed he could simply command the universe to bend to his absolute will, just as he always had in the past. Well, this changes absolutely everything, William declared, his voice booming with sudden, inappropriate confidence. He actually smiled, a cold, greedy smile that made my stomach turn with disgust. If you truly own this company, then our financial problems are completely solved. You will simply forgive the hospital debt immediately and restructure the remaining loans at a 0% interest rate. We are family after all, Kelsey. We must protect our own legacy. Do you genuinely believe that business operates on the foundation of biological relations? William the Fart asked, my voice dripping with cold sarcasm. You stood in front of your wealthy peers and stated that I was no longer your daughter. You legally removed me from your insurance, you canceled my phone plan, and you erased my name from the family trust. You severed those ties maliciously. You cannot suddenly claim parental privilege simply because your hospital is facing imminent financial destruction. The banking sector does not care about your fabricated family loyalty, and neither do I. I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his statement hang in the heavy air of the boardroom. Family, I repeated softly, shaking my head in pure disbelief. That is a truly fascinating word choice, coming from a man who threw my winter coats at me in a plastic garbage bag less than 2 weeks ago. You publicly humiliated me in front of hundreds of high society guests and told me I was a worthless disgrace. Now you want me to hand over millions of dollars to save your sinking ship. Isabella immediately jumped into the conversation, her eyes gleaming with unchecked greed and overwhelming entitlement. Daddy is absolutely right, she said, leaning forward and completely dropping her earlier hostility. You obviously built this little tech company just to prove a petty point to us. Well, point proven, Kelsey. You made some money with your computers. But you are still not a doctor. I am the surgical resident. I am the golden child who actually carries the Kensington medical legacy forward. Since I am marrying Jamal, next month you need to transfer your majority shares of Aegis Health Tech directly into my name. Consider it my wedding gift. Family wealth always belongs to the child who actually honors the family name and reputation. Isabella continued her delusional rant, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. You owe this to us, Kelsey, she insisted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. You abandoned the medical field. You disgraced our parents by sitting behind a glowing monitor all day instead of stepping into an operating room. I am the one who works 12-hour shifts. I am the one who saves lives. I deserve the financial rewards of your little tech experiment because I am the one doing the real work. You are just a code monkey who got incredibly lucky, Hand over the shares and we might consider letting you attend the wedding reception. I actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed off the soundproof glass walls, sharp and entirely devoid of any warmth. I looked at Jamal, who was sitting completely frozen beside Isabella. He looked horrified by his future wife's demands. Jamal was an African-American man from a highly respected family of judges and civil rights attorneys. He had built his entire corporate law career on ethical principles and integrity. I could see the exact moment his perspective shifted. I was now realizing that the pristine, affluent medical family he was preparing to marry into was actually a toxic swamp of greedy, entitled monsters. He stared at Isabella as if he was looking at a complete stranger. Jamal slowly shifted his chair, creating a distinct physical distance between himself and his fiancée. As external corporate counsel, his primary duty was to the financial stability of the hospital entity itself, not to the personal whims of the chief of surgery's spoiled daughter. I was beginning to recognize that his professional reputation was inextricably tied to a sinking ship commanded by lunatics. He remained absolutely silent, but his sharp dark eyes studied my face, assessing my strategic positioning with newfound professional respect. "Transfer my company to you?" I asked, looking back at my sister with pure amusement. "Isabella, you could not even manage a basic Excel spreadsheet without throwing a violent tantrum. I did not buy your hospital's debt to save your fragile legacy or fund your lavish lifestyle. I bought your debt because, as your majority creditor, I gained absolute legal access to all of your internal financial records." I reached under the table and pulled out a thick, heavy binder. I dropped it onto the glass surface with a loud, heavy thud that made everyone jump. The cover boldly read "Forensic Audit Report." William flinched backward as if the binder itself was a loaded weapon. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice trembling with panic. "It is the real reason I called you here today," I explained, leaning forward so my presence dominated the space. "I did not bring you to my headquarters to negotiate a corporate bailout. I brought you here to audit you. My artificial intelligence software spent the last 48 hours scanning every single invoice, every offshore wire transfer, and every hidden expense account you tried to bury deep in the hospital ledger. I know exactly where the missing money went, William. I know exactly why Kensington General is bankrupt, and it has nothing to do with patient care or insurance payouts. My artificial intelligence algorithm is specifically designed to bypass standard accounting tricks," I elaborated, watching the sheer panic wash over my father's face. "It flagged every single anomaly in your billing department within seconds. You thought you were clever hiding those massive unauthorized withdrawals behind layers of administrative consulting fees and inflated medical supply purchases. But digital footprints are permanent, William. Every shell company you created, every forged signature on the procurement orders, and every phantom vendor you paid was meticulously uncovered, cross-referenced, and verified by my highly advanced system. You underestimated the very technology you mocked 6 years ago. While you were busy shaking hands at country clubs and taking credit for the hard work of your medical staff, my software was learning how to dismantle corrupt empires just like yours, piece by piece. Your entire pristine legacy is nothing more than a carefully constructed house of cards built on a weak foundation of desperate lies and stolen money," I said quietly, letting the devastating reality sink into his bones. "The game is officially over, and I am the one holding the match." William started sweating, pulling frantically at his expensive silk tie. Isabella looked nervously between her father and the massive forensic audit binder, completely unaware of the massive legal disaster about to unfold around her. She still thought this was just a sibling rivalry, but William knew he was facing federal prison. I picked up a thin, bright red folder that had been sitting near my coffee cup. I did not hand it to William. I did not hand it to Isabella. I slid the red folder smoothly across the polished glass table directly into the hands of the one man in the room who truly understood the devastating power of the law. "Open the folder and look at the offshore wire transfer receipts for yourself. Look at the dates and match them to the invoices." "You are a man of the law, Jamal," I said, locking eyes with the brilliant corporate attorney. "I know you value justice above everything else. I know you built your entire prestigious career on holding corrupt executives fully accountable for their actions, regardless of their social standing or their wealth. Do not let them ever deceive you anymore. Ask your future father-in-law how he funded Isabella's $150,000 engagement ring using the Pediatric Oncology Charity Fund. Jamal did not hesitate. His powerful fingers reached across the sleek glass surface of the boardroom table and grasped the bright red folder I had just offered him. As a senior partner at a prestigious East Coast law firm, he possessed a brilliant mind, trained to dissect complex financial discrepancies with precision. He flipped the heavy cardboard cover open. The room felt completely devoid of oxygen as his dark eyes scanned the top document. It was a certified bank wire transfer receipt. The routing numbers were highlighted in bright yellow ink, cross-referenced directly with the internal accounts of Kensington General Hospital's Pediatric Oncology Charity Fund. The destination account belonged to a high-end luxury jeweler in Manhattan, the exact jeweler who had custom-designed Isabella's massive diamond engagement ring. William lunged forward, his heavy leather chair scraping violently against the polished floorboards. He reached out with trembling hands, attempting to snatch the folder away from Jamal before the damage could be finalized. But Jamal was incredibly fast. He shifted his broad shoulders, pulling the documents out of William's reach, while his eyes remained locked on the damning evidence before him. The meticulous paper trail my artificial intelligence software had provided was absolute and undeniable. It brilliantly outlined years of systematic embezzlement, offshore shell companies, and blatant wire fraud. Jamal flipped to the second page, then the third. His strong jaw clenched so tightly I could actually see the muscles feathering beneath his skin. I had spent his entire adult life fighting for justice, representing corporate clients with unwavering integrity. And now he was holding undeniable proof that the pristine medical family he was about to marry into was actually a syndicate of ruthless criminals. "Jamal, what are you looking at?" Isabella cried out, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency that echoed off the soundproof glass walls. "Do not look at whatever garbage she printed out. It is all fake." Jamal did not even look at her. He kept his dark eyes glued to a specific offshore account ledger that detailed millions of dollars in stolen funds. "William, you told me the charity deficit was due to an aggressive expansion into underserved local communities." Jamal stated, his voice dangerously low and resonating with suppressed fury. "You sat in my law office, looked me directly in the eye, and swore on your medical license that those funds were being reallocated for mobile pediatric clinics. But this ledger clearly shows you transferred $15 million into a private Cayman Islands account registered under your wife's maiden name. You stole from sick children to fund your lavish lifestyle." William was sweating profusely, his face a mask of absolute terror. "Jamal, you have to deeply understand the immense pressures of running a major medical institution," William stammered, raising his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. "The financial landscape of the healthcare industry is absolutely brutal. I was merely moving assets to protect the hospital from aggressive corporate taxation. It was a temporary holding strategy to ensure our long-term survival. We can fix this internally right now. We just need to keep this minor issue inside the family." Isabella suddenly realized that her perfect wealthy facade was disintegrating right in front of her highly principled fiancé. She immediately defaulted to the only defense mechanism she had ever known, which was playing the absolute victim. She burst into loud, dramatic tears, burying her face in her hands before reaching out to grab Jamal's tailored suit jacket. "Jamal, please listen to me," Isabella sobbed, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. "Kelsey is—" She dropped out of medical school because she could not handle the rigorous academic pressure, and she has been insanely jealous of my success ever since. She hired some cheap internet hackers to forge these documents just to ruin my perfect wedding. You cannot possibly believe this fabricated trash over your own future wife." I sat back in my plush executive chair watching my sister deliver the performance of a lifetime. She was incredibly convincing. If I had not engineered the complex artificial intelligence that pulled these exact files directly from their own encrypted hospital servers, I might have actually applauded her dramatic acting skills. But Jamal was not a foolish man easily swayed by fake tears. He was a brilliant corporate attorney who recognized the undeniable authenticity of federal banking codes. I knew forgery was impossible here. "Isabella, let go of my jacket," Jamal commanded, his voice entirely stripped of any warmth. Isabella recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Her fake tears instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of genuine shock and terror. "Jamal, you cannot do this to me," she pleaded, her voice trembling with rising panic. "We are getting married next month. The elegant invitations are already sent. You are supposed to protect me from her." When William realized that Isabella's emotional manipulation was failing, he decided to employ his absolute favorite tactic: pure intimidation. William slammed his fist violently onto the glass table, his face contorting into a mask of vicious, desperate authority. "You listen to me right now," Jamal Williams snarled, leaning across the table with a menacing glare. "You are the external corporate counsel for Kensington General Hospital. You signed a strictly binding retainer agreement. Every single financial document you are currently looking at falls strictly under attorney-client privilege. If you breathe a single word of this confidential information to anyone outside this locked room, I will personally guarantee that you never practice law in the United States again. I sit on the board of 3 different prestigious legal charity foundations. I know the head of the State Bar Association personally. I will have your legal license permanently revoked before you can even walk out of this Manhattan building. You work for me. You will close that red folder, you will hand it back to me right now, and you will figure out a legal way to bury this mess immediately." The sheer audacity of my father's vicious threat hung heavily in the chilled air of the boardroom. He genuinely believed that his accumulated wealth and social status gave him the ultimate power to subjugate a distinguished man of the law. He actually thought Jamal would cower in absolute fear of losing his prestigious corporate career. He completely fundamentally misunderstood the strong ethical man sitting across from him. Jamal slowly closed the red folder. He perfectly aligned the edges of the thick paper, running his large hand over the smooth cardboard cover. The silence in the soundproof boardroom was absolutely deafening. I watched closely as Jamal deliberately unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket. He reached down to the yellow legal notepad he had brought into the meeting, the one he had fully intended to use to negotiate my financial surrender. He picked it up and dropped it carelessly onto the hardwood floor. The heavy thud echoed sharply, symbolizing the end of his employment. Then Jamal raised his left hand into the air. He grasped the custom platinum engagement band he wore on his ring finger, the exact matching band to the fraudulent diamond currently sparkling on Isabella's shaking hand. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Jamal slid the expensive ring completely off his finger. "Jamal, no." Isabella gasped, reaching her hands out toward him in pure desperation. Jamal placed the platinum ring directly on top of the red forensic audit folder. He stood up, pushing his heavy leather chair back. He towered over William, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable authority that made my father shrink backward into his seat. "William, your blinding arrogance is only exceeded by your profound ignorance of federal law." Jamal stated, his voice echoing with devastating clarity. "You just threatened to destroy my entire career if I do not actively help you conceal a massive financial crime. You attempted to use attorney-client privilege as a convenient shield for your long-term embezzlement. But you clearly failed to consult proper legal counsel before making that ridiculous threat." William swallowed hard, the color draining completely from his face as Jamal leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the glass table. "Under the crime-fraud exception, attorney-client privilege does not apply," Jamal declared, quoting the law with surgical precision. "A client cannot claim legal privilege when they purposefully use their legal representation to further or conceal fraudulent or criminal activity. By bringing me into this room to negotiate a debt settlement while actively hiding $15 million in stolen charity funds, you have entirely invalidated any protection you thought you possessed. You are exposed completely." Jamal picked up his briefcase, his dark eyes locking onto my father's terrified face. "I am not your shield, William. As a sworn officer of the court, I have a strict fiduciary duty and an absolute legal obligation to report this level of blatant wire fraud to the federal authorities immediately. I am heading directly from this building to the local FBI field office." 2 weeks passed since that brief phone call with Jamal. During those 14 days, my company tightened its grip around Kensington General Hospital. The financial trap I had carefully laid was fully armed and ready to spring. William and his board were completely out of options. Their cash reserves were drained. They had been forced to freeze hiring and were terrifyingly close to missing payroll for their medical staff. Desperation has a distinct smell, and my father was reeking of it. He had spent his entire life building an illusion of untouchable prestige, but now he was actually drowning in the consequences of his own corporate greed. Through Jamal, he had begged my office for an emergency bailout meeting. I agreed to host them at my headquarters in Manhattan. Today, the illusion would shatter. My headquarters occupied the top 20 floors of a sleek glass skyscraper in the financial district. It was a fortress of modern design and cutting-edge technology. Every surface gleamed with polished steel and pristine white marble. The security systems were entirely biometric, controlled by proprietary artificial intelligence. As the chief executive officer, I usually spent mornings analyzing market trends. But today, I decided to personally conduct a security protocol review in the main executive lobby. I wanted to see the exact expressions on their faces. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, holding a simple digital clipboard as I reviewed visitor logs. I looked every bit the corporate professional, but to someone blinded by arrogance. I suppose I could easily be mistaken for a low-level assistant. That was exactly what I was counting on. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the lobby swung open. William walked in first. Even though he was facing total financial ruin, he carried himself with that signature unwarranted arrogance. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, his chin tilted upward as if he owned the building. Isabella trailed right behind him, clinging tightly to Jamal's arm. My sister was dressed in head-to-toe designer labels, trying to project an image of immense wealth to intimidate whatever billionaire she thought she was meeting. Jamal looked completely focused. He carried a heavy leather briefcase filled with hospital financial records. He was here to save his future father-in-law from bankruptcy. As they approached the reception desk, Isabella's eyes darted around the expansive lobby, taking in the sheer wealth of the facility. Then her gaze landed directly on me. I was standing near the digital turnstiles, tapping my stylus against the clipboard. I watched the gears turn in her head. She looked genuinely confused to see me standing in a multi-million-dollar corporate lobby. But then her legendary ego took over. She instantly assumed I was just a lowly receptionist. Isabella let go of Jamal's arm and marched straight toward me, with a cruel, triumphant smirk plastered across her face. "Well, well, well," she laughed, her voice echoing sharply against the marble walls. "Look who it is. The medical school dropout actually managed to find a job opening doors for real professionals." William turned around and his eyes narrowed the moment he saw me. He let out a harsh scoff, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "I told you to stay out of my sight, Kelsey," he hissed. "What are you doing here? Are you a temp worker? If you embarrass me in front of the executives here, I will personally make sure you are fired. We are here for a critical meeting with the chief executive officer." I kept my expression entirely neutral. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I simply looked at my clipboard and back at them. "You are here for the 10 o'clock restructuring meeting regarding Kensington General Hospital," I stated calmly, keeping my voice perfectly even. Isabella rolled her eyes and snapped her fingers at me like I was a disobedient dog. "Obviously, we are here for the meeting, you idiot," she sneered. "Since you are clearly just an intern, you can make yourself useful. We have a stressful negotiation ahead of us. Go fetch us 3 coffees. I want a vanilla latte extra hot. Dad takes his black. Do not mess it up, Kelsey, or I will gladly mention your incompetence to the billionaire who actually runs this place." Jamal stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. He looked at Isabella with a deep frown, his strong, ethical compass clashing with her cruelty. "Isabella, that is completely unnecessary," he said, his voice low and firm. "We are guests in this building. We do not treat employees like that." He turned to me, offering a polite, apologetic nod. "I am very sorry about that. We do not need any coffee, thank you. We are looking for the executive boardroom." I looked at Jamal, appreciating his professionalism. He truly was a decent man who had been blinded by my family's pristine facade. He had no idea what kind of monsters he was preparing to marry into. It was a shame his heart would break along with their bank accounts. "It is quite all right, Jamal," I said smoothly, intentionally, using his first name to throw them off balance. "Isabella has always had a specific way of speaking to people she believes are beneath her." I tapped my clipboard, bringing up the elevator access codes. If you follow me, I will escort you to the top floor. The boardroom is ready for your presentation. William scoffed again, adjusting his expensive tie. Just lead the way and keep your mouth shut, he muttered. I cannot believe a company this prestigious would hire someone with your pathetic track record. I turned around and led them toward the private executive elevators. I swiped my keycard, and we all stepped into the glass cab. As the elevator rapidly ascended the 80 floors to the executive suite, the silence was thick and heavy. Isabella spent the entire ride fixing her lipstick in the reflective glass, completely ignoring my presence. William kept checking his gold watch, sweating slightly under the collar. Jamal was reviewing his legal notes, silently preparing his opening statements for the negotiation. When the elevator doors finally chimed and slid open, they revealed the crown jewel of Aegis Health Tech. The entire top floor was a massive open space featuring panoramic views of the entire Manhattan skyline. At the very center of the floor sat the primary executive boardroom, enclosed entirely in thick, soundproof smart glass. A massive polished obsidian table dominated the room, surrounded by plush leather chairs. William let out a low whistle, clearly impressed by the sheer display of wealth and corporate dominance. Now this is what success looks like, he whispered to Isabella. Take notes. This is the kind of power our family deserves to align with. Isabella nodded eagerly, tightly gripping her designer handbag. Do you think the CEO is already in there? She asked, peering through the glass walls. I walked ahead of them, pushing open the heavy glass doors to the boardroom. Please step inside, I instructed politely, gesturing toward the long table. You may set up your financial documents while you wait. Jamal walked in first, setting his heavy briefcase on the table and pulling out thick stacks of audited financial reports. William and Isabella followed, taking their seats near the middle of the table. They were practically vibrating with nervous energy, completely ready to beg for their financial survival. Isabella looked at me expectantly, tapping her manicured fingernails against the glass table. Well, what are you standing around for? She snapped. I told you I wanted a vanilla latte. Go get the CEO and fetch my coffee before I lose my temper. I did not leave the room. Instead, I walked calmly past them, moving deliberately toward the heavy leather chair positioned at the very head of the table. The chair reserved strictly for the chief executive officer. William slammed his hand against the table, his face contorting with rage. Kelsey, what do you think you are doing? He yelled, his voice bouncing off the soundproof walls. Get away from that chair. Are you out of your mind? If the boss walks in and sees a lowly assistant sitting in their seat, you will ruin this entire deal. Get out of this room right now. I stood behind the executive chair. I reached out my right hand and placed my thumb against the glowing biometric scanner embedded into the surface of the obsidian table. A soft digital chime echoed through the room. The heavy glass boardroom doors slid shut with a mechanical lock. Instantly, the transparent glass walls frosted over, turning completely opaque and sealing us entirely inside a soundproof vault. I slowly pulled out the executive chair and sat down, crossing my legs. I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. I prefer my coffee black. Isabella, I said, my voice ringing with absolute unbreakable authority. Now let us talk about your hospital's bankruptcy. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria hummed with the quiet arrogance of high society. Tonight was the National Medical Innovators Gala, the absolute pinnacle of the medical calendar. Men in custom tuxedos and women in designer gowns clinked crystal champagne flutes, exchanging polite laughter while networking. I stood near the entrance, smoothing down the fabric of my emerald green evening gown. Over the past few days, my parents had launched a vicious, highly coordinated media smear campaign against me. Panicking over the forensic audit I had revealed in the boardroom, William and Catherine used their public relations connections to plant fake news stories. They painted me as a corporate spy, a rogue hacker who had illegally infiltrated Kensington General Hospital to frame her own father out of vindictive jealousy. The board of Aegis Health Tech had grown incredibly nervous about the bad press, pressuring me to step down temporarily until the dust settled. I agreed to step back from public operations, but I refused to hide. Instead of cowering in my penthouse, I RSVP'd to tonight's gala as the primary keynote speaker. The irony was that William was also here to receive a prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award. He genuinely believed he had won. I thought his media manipulation had neutralized the threat I posed. I watched him from across the ballroom holding court with prominent politicians. He looked smug, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. Isabella was hovering near the main stage, nervously checking her diamond watch. Since Jamal had removed his engagement ring and walked out of the boardroom, my sister had been operating in a state of sheer panic and malicious desperation. She blamed me entirely for the destruction of her wedding and the loss of her wealthy fiancé. I knew Isabella better than anyone else. She was predictable, petty, and incapable of fighting a fair battle. When she felt cornered, she always resorted to the lowest humiliating tactics. I took a slow sip of sparkling water and watched her carefully. Her red silk dress swept the floor as she darted her eyes back and forth. Right on cue, Isabella glanced around to ensure no one was watching her, then slipped quietly through heavy black curtains leading directly into the audio-visual control room behind the main stage. I smiled. She was taking the bait exactly as planned. Inside the dimly lit control room, the primary technician had conveniently stepped out for a scheduled break. I had personally arranged for that specific technician, an undercover cybersecurity expert employed by my company, to leave his post at exactly 8:15. On the main control console sat a silver flash drive clearly labeled with my name and the title of my keynote presentation. Isabella approached the console, her hands shaking with malicious excitement. 6 years ago, when my father threw me out of the house for dropping out of medical school, I had suffered a severe depressive episode. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and completely defeated. Isabella had taken several degrading photographs of me during that dark time. Photos of me crying on the floor wearing stained clothes, looking entirely broken and pathetic. She had saved those humiliating images on her own personal flash drive, waiting for the perfect moment to weaponize my past pain against me. She quickly pulled my silver flash drive from the console and replaced it with her own. She wanted to broadcast my lowest moments to the entire medical community, hoping to destroy my credibility and reinforce my father's fake news story that I was just an unstable, jealous dropout. Isabella sneaked back out of the control room, a triumphant, wicked smirk plastered across her face. I caught her eye as she re-entered the ballroom. She gave me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred mixed with giddy anticipation. She thought she had just orchestrated my ultimate public destruction. What my arrogant sister failed to realize was that I had anticipated her petty sabotage from the very beginning. I knew she still had those old photographs, and I knew she would try to use them tonight. The silver flash drive she stole was completely empty. The console in the audio-visual room was not a standard computer system. It was directly linked to a highly encrypted cloud server, controlled entirely by Aegis Health Tech. By plugging her personal flash drive into that specific console, Isabella had unknowingly bypassed all of her own security protocols. She did not just upload her photos, she granted my artificial intelligence software complete unrestricted access to every single file, email, and hidden document she had ever saved on that drive. My software was currently mining her data at lightning speed, extracting the exact evidence I needed to execute the final phase of my plan. I did not need to lift a single finger. Isabella had just handed me the executioner's axe. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, signaling the beginning of the award ceremony. A hush fell over the wealthy crowd as the master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, his voice echoing through the massive speakers. "Tonight we honor a man who has dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of medical excellence. A visionary leader, a compassionate healer, and a pillar of our community. Please welcome the Chief of Surgery at Kensington General William to receive this year's Lifetime Achievement Award." The room erupted into thunderous applause. William stood up, buttoning his custom tuxedo jacket, and walked toward the stage with the swagger of a conquering king. Catherine was clapping loudly from the front row, wiping fake tears of joy from her eyes. Isabella stood beside her, practically vibrating with excitement, waiting for her moment to ruin me. William reached the podium and accepted the heavy crystal award. He smiled warmly at the audience, holding his hands up to quiet the applause. "Thank you," he began, his voice projecting deep, practiced humility. This award is not just a reflection of my work, but a testament to the unwavering support of my beautiful family. We have always believed that integrity and ethics are the absolute foundation of medicine. I looked at William, maintaining intense eye contact from the back of the room. He saw me, and his smile widened into a malicious, arrogant sneer. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought his legacy was safe. Now William continued gesturing toward the massive digital projector screen spanning the entire wall behind him. I would like to share a brief presentation highlighting the future of our hospital. Isabella quickly signaled the audio-visual room, her eyes gleaming with wicked delight. She fully expected the screen to light up with the humiliating photos of my depressive breakdown. She expected the crowd to gasp in horror at my pathetic state. She expected me to run out of the ballroom crying, finally defeated. The screen flickered to life. The high-definition display illuminated the entire ballroom. But there were no photos of me crying. There were no images of a broken medical school dropout. Instead, the screen broadcast a live, uneditable, high-resolution display of a Cayman Islands offshore bank account ledger. The account was registered directly under William's name. The crowd fell absolutely silent, their faces masked in utter confusion as they stared at the massive numbers glowing on the screen. Over $15 million in stolen pediatric oncology funds stared back at them. William froze, the color draining instantly from his face. He turned around to look at the screen, and the heavy crystal award slipped from his hands, crashing onto the wooden stage with a deafening shatter. Before anyone could speak, the screen automatically transitioned to a new document. It was an email chain extracted directly from the flash drive Isabella had just plugged into my system. The emails were displayed in massive, undeniable text for hundreds of medical professionals to read. The sender was William. The recipient was Isabella. The subject line read, "Urgent billing adjustments." The text of the email was explicitly clear. "Isabella, I need you to log into the patient portal using your resident credentials. Falsify the billing codes for the last 50 surgical procedures, inflate the charges by 400%, and route the excess funds to the secondary account. Do not leave a paper trail. If anyone asks, blame the administrative staff. We need this money to cover the mortgage on the Hamptons property." The silence in the ballroom morphed into a collective gasp of pure horror. The pristine legacy of Kensington General Hospital was being dismantled live on stage. Catherine covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a hysterical sob as the reality of their public destruction set in. Isabella stood frozen in the front row, her face pale, fully realizing that she had provided the exact evidence needed to destroy her own career. She had handed over the emails that proved she was actively participating in massive medical fraud. William did not try to defend himself. He knew the evidence projected on the massive high-definition screen was absolutely undeniable. His offshore bank accounts, his forged billing codes, and his desperate attempts to cover up his embezzlement were now public knowledge. Hundreds of influential medical professionals, politicians, and wealthy donors were staring at him with undisguised disgust. The man who had spent his entire life obsessing over his elite social status was completely ruined in a matter of seconds. William stumbled backward, knocking over a row of crystal champagne flutes. His polished facade shattered entirely. He turned around, shoved past a group of shocked hospital board members, and sprinted desperately toward the ballroom exit. He was fleeing the scene of his own professional execution like a coward. I did not stay to watch the rest of the fallout. My highly trained security detail immediately formed a protective perimeter around me and escorted me out of the Waldorf Astoria through a secure private side door. I slid into the back of my waiting, armored vehicle, feeling a profound sense of absolute clarity. The suffocating weight of my family's toxic lies had finally been lifted. I watched the bright city lights of Manhattan blur past my tinted windows as my driver navigated the busy streets toward my home. My phone was already vibrating endlessly with urgent news alerts and frantic messages from corporate journalists. The story of the Kensington General Hospital fraud scandal was breaking across every major financial news network. I arrived back at my $50.5 million penthouse in Tribeca shortly before midnight. The building was a heavily fortified sanctuary of modern luxury and cutting-edge technology. I stepped into my private ground floor lobby, dismissing my security team for the night. I wanted nothing more than to enjoy the absolute silence of my victory. I walked toward the private glass elevator and reached out to scan my biometric thumbprint on the security console. Before my finger could even touch the glowing digital sensor, a heavy shadow detached itself from the dark marble pillars near the concierge desk. It was William. My father looked completely deranged. His custom-tailored tuxedo was severely rumpled, his expensive silk bow tie hung loosely around his neck, and his forehead was glistening with a thick layer of cold sweat. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the empty lobby like a trapped predator. He had obviously bribed one of the night shift building attendants or slipped through the service entrance to bypass the exterior security gates. I was trespassing in my highly secure building and he looked dangerous. But a cornered animal is always the most desperate, and William was currently watching his entire empire burn to the ground. "You think you have won, Kelsey?" William spat out, his voice echoing harshly against the polished marble walls. He took a menacing step toward me, closing the physical distance between us. "You think you can just destroy my life, humiliate me in front of my peers, and walk away without any consequences? I am still your father, and I still hold the power to completely crush you." I remained perfectly still. My pulse did not even elevate. I looked at the pathetic, desperate man standing in front of me and felt absolutely nothing. "You are trespassing, William," I stated, keeping my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You have exactly 10 seconds to turn around and leave this building before the artificial intelligence system automatically dispatches the police to arrest you." William let out a manic, desperate laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Call them," he challenged, taking another aggressive step forward. "Call the police. Call the press while you are at it. Because I have something they will be very interested in seeing tonight." He reached a shaking hand into his ruined tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The flap of the envelope was sealed shut with bright red tamper-evident tape. He held it up in the air, waving it like a weapon. "Did you really think I would let a worthless dropout take down my legacy without a backup plan?" He sneered, his eyes wide with malicious intent. "I kept everything, Kelsey. I kept all of your darkest secrets locked away in my private safe for a moment exactly like this." I looked at the thick envelope, recognizing the official medical insignia stamped clearly on the top left corner. It was the crest of the Beacon Psychiatric Institute. 6 years ago, when the immense, crushing pressure of medical school and my father's constant emotional abuse finally broke my spirit, I had suffered a severe depressive episode. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and struggling to find a single reason to keep living. I had voluntarily sought treatment at Beacon. William had maliciously used that exact clinical diagnosis to justify cutting off my tuition and throwing me out on the street. He had labeled me genetically defective and clinically unstable. "These are your highly confidential psychiatric evaluations from your time in medical school," William explained, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. "Full clinical profiles, therapy session transcripts, official diagnoses of severe depression and crippling anxiety, a complete and utter mental breakdown documented by licensed medical professionals. If I release these confidential files to the media and to the board of directors at Aegis Health Tech, your career is completely over. The stock valuation of your precious artificial intelligence company will plummet the very moment your wealthy investors find out their brilliant chief executive officer is actually clinically insane." He tapped the envelope aggressively against his palm, reveling in his perceived victory. He genuinely believed he had found my fatal weakness. He thought he could use my past pain to extort me into surrendering my entire company. "You are going to pull out your phone right now and log into your corporate accounts," William commanded, pointing a demanding finger at my face. "You are going to transfer ownership of Kensington General Hospital back to me immediately. You are going to issue a public statement claiming the forensic audit at the gala was a massive glitch in your artificial intelligence software. You will publicly clear my name, and you will restore Isabella's medical career. If you refuse to follow my orders, I will send these psychiatric files to every major news outlet in the country by tomorrow morning. The world will see you as a crazy, bitter dropout who fabricated a massive lie just because she lost her mind. I will destroy your company, Kelsey." He stood there breathing heavily, waiting for me to break down in tears. He waited for the panic to set in. He waited for me to beg him to keep my medical secrets hidden from the public eye. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I simply reached into the pocket of my designer coat and pulled out my smartphone. "Are you transferring the assets?" William asked, a greedy, eager smile forming on his sweaty face. I unlocked my phone and tapped a single button on my custom dashboard. A soft chime echoed through the lobby. "I am not transferring anything, William." I replied, my voice as cold as ice. "I am simply bringing up my recent corporate acquisition portfolio. You see, building an artificial intelligence company requires massive amounts of secure data storage. 3 weeks ago, Aegis Health Tech needed to expand its highly encrypted cloud servers. So I purchased a massive data center network." I turned the screen of my phone to face him. I displayed the official corporate acquisition documents. "I purchased the parent company that owns and operates the Beacon Psychiatric Institute," I explained, watching the greedy smile instantly vanish from his face. "I own the hospital where I was treated 6 years ago, which means I legally own and control the encrypted servers where those exact medical files are supposed to be securely stored." William stared at my phone screen, his eyes widening in absolute horror as the reality of my words slowly began to compute in his desperate brain. "Do you know what the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act is?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You are a hospital executive, so I assume you are intimately familiar with HIPAA regulations. You just bypassed my secure corporate network to illegally download and print the sealed medical records of a former patient. You removed highly confidential psychiatric evaluations from a protected server without any legal authorization or patient consent." I took a step toward him, completely flipping the power dynamic in the room. He instinctively shrank back, clutching the manila envelope against his chest, as if it were suddenly burning his hands. "That is not just a breach of medical ethics, William," I continued, my voice slicing through his panic like a scalpel. "That is a severe federal offense. You just committed a massive felony to facilitate a corporate extortion attempt. And the best part of this entire encounter is that you just explicitly detailed your entire criminal extortion plan while holding the stolen evidence in your hands." William swallowed hard, looking around the empty lobby. "You have no proof," he stammered, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "It is your word against mine, Kelsey. No one is here to witness this." I smiled, pointing a slender finger toward the ceiling corners of the lobby. "This is a $50.5 million penthouse facility, William. It is equipped with military-grade surveillance technology. My artificial intelligence system has been recording high-definition video and crystal-clear audio of this entire interaction from the very second you stepped out of the shadows." The heavy envelope slipped from his trembling hands, hitting the marble floor with a soft slap. His legs gave out and he slumped against the polished stone wall, completely and utterly defeated. He had tried to weaponize my past trauma, and he had just handed me the exact evidence I needed to put him in a federal prison. I tapped another button on my phone. The security system in the lobby flashed a brilliant red. "You are right about one thing, William," I said, looking down at the broken man who used to terrorize my existence. "You do hold the power to crush someone tonight. You just crushed yourself. The police are already on their way." The flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from the street below my penthouse when the security console chimed again. The artificial intelligence system I designed already processed. William being escorted out of my lobby in handcuffs. He was sitting in a holding cell facing multiple federal charges for extortion and violating health privacy laws. I was sipping coffee and reviewing financial markets when my head of security called my private residence. He informed me Catherine was standing in the lobby. My mother was demanding to see me. Part of me wanted to tell security to throw her out, but a larger strategic part of my brain knew a cornered animal is unpredictable. I needed to see exactly what her next move would be. I authorized her access to the private elevator. The heavy glass doors of my penthouse slid open. Catherine stepped into my living room looking entirely different from the arrogant elite who had threatened to call security on me weeks ago. She was wearing a simple beige trench coat without her usual diamond jewelry. Her blonde hair was disheveled and her eyes were red from crying. She looked around the massive $50.5 million apartment with awe and desperate calculation. Then she saw me standing by the marble kitchen island. She immediately burst into tears and rushed toward me with her arms wide open. She tried to pull me into a tight embrace, but I took a step backward, holding up my hand to stop her. She stumbled, letting her arms fall to her sides as she wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "Kelsey, my girl!" Catherine sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I am so sorry. I am sorry for everything that has happened. You have to understand, your father is a deeply troubled man. He was under so much pressure at the hospital. I never agreed with how he treated you. I always knew you were destined for greatness. Look at this magnificent home you have built for yourself. You are my brilliant daughter, and I love you so much." I stared at her, letting the hypocrisy of her words hang in the air. 2 weeks ago, she called me a dark cloud over the family and demanded I be thrown out of a party like trash. Now she was standing in my penthouse claiming she believed in my brilliance. It was a spectacular performance. "You have to stop this corporate takeover, Kelsey," she begged, clasping her hands together. "You have made your point. You have proven you are far more successful than any of us. But you are destroying our family. Your father was denied bail this morning. He is sitting in a jail cell talking about ending his own life. He says he has nothing left to live for if he loses his legacy. And your sister Isabella is completely devastated." Jamal canceled the wedding and moved out of their apartment. The medical board suspended her surgical license pending a federal investigation. Her entire life is ruined. Please, Kelsey, I am begging you as your mother. Drop the corporate acquisition. Forgive the hospital debt. Let your father come home and let us be a real family again. We can start over. I leaned against the kitchen island, crossing my arms over my chest. "Start over," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "You want to start over now that you have nothing left. You want to play the loving mother, now that your husband faces federal prison and your golden child has been exposed as a fraud. You never cared about being a real family, Catherine. You only cared about your social status and your endless supply of money." Catherine shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "That is not true, Kelsey. I was just trying to protect you. I wanted you to succeed in medical school because I wanted you to have a future. I was tough on you because I loved you. You were so fragile back then." "Fragile," I said, stepping closer to her. "I was not fragile. I was suffocating under your toxic expectations. But let us talk about that future you supposedly wanted for me. Let us talk about how I built this company from scratch. When I dropped out of medical school and you threw me out on the street, I had nothing. I was eating instant noodles and coding on a broken laptop. I had to bootstrap Aegis Health Tech by working 4 minimum wage jobs just to pay for server space. I endured starvation and struggle because my college trust fund mysteriously vanished." Catherine flinched, her eyes darting away from my face. "The trust fund my grandparents set up for me was supposed to contain over $200,000. I continued, my voice rising with cold precision. "It was legally designated for my education and living expenses. But when I went to the bank to access it after you kicked me out, the account manager told me it had been drained. Every single penny was gone right around the same time I dropped out. I know you had financial power of attorney over that specific account, Catherine. So tell me, where did my money go? Where did the $200,000 my grandparents left me disappear to?" Catherine backed away, her fake tears instantly drying up. Her posture became rigid, and the sweet, loving mother facade began to crack rapidly. "That money was meant for your medical education," she stammered, her voice losing its warm tone. "When you decided to throw your life away and play with computers, you forfeited your right to those funds. We used it to cover the massive debts you caused us." "I caused you debts?" I asked, tilting my head. "I was living in a cheap dorm and eating cafeteria food. You did not pay a single dime for my housing. Where did my money actually go, Catherine? I want to hear you say it." She glared at me, her true colors finally bleeding through the pristine high society mask. She was exactly like William. When backed into a corner, her massive ego would not allow her to accept defeat or admit wrongdoing. She believed she was entirely justified in every cruel action she had ever taken against me. "You want to know where the money went?" Catherine screamed, her face contorting with sudden explosive rage. "I took that money. I went to the bank and I emptied your entire college fund. You were a complete waste of space, Kelsey. You were an embarrassment who could not handle basic medical school classes. Isabella was the smart one. Isabella was the golden child who was actually making us proud. She had just completed her first grueling year of medical residency, and she was exhausted. She deserved a reward for her hard work. So I took your useless trust fund, and I paid for Isabella's luxury European vacation. I paid for her to spend 2 months in Paris staying in five-star hotels. Catherine continued, her voice echoing harshly through my pristine living room. She deserved every single penny of that money because she was building a prestigious future. You were just sitting in a dark room staring at a screen being a pathetic disappointment. Why should you get $200,000 to waste on a failed life while your sister was out there saving lives and elevating our family name? I took your money because you did not deserve it. I would do it again in a heartbeat. You are a terrible, ungrateful daughter, and you always have been. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Catherine stood breathing heavily, glaring at me with pure hatred. She admitted stealing $200,000 from her own child to fund a vacation for her favorite daughter. I did not yell back. I did not cry. I just simply smiled. It was the same calculated smile I gave my father at the engagement party. I reached out and gently tapped the surface of my marble kitchen island. Catherine, I said, my voice carrying a lethal weight. Do you see that small blinking red light positioned right next to my espresso machine? Catherine frowned, following my gaze toward the sleek coffee maker. A tiny crimson light was pulsing steadily on the edge of a black recording device. That is a high-definition capture system linked directly to my corporate security network, I explained, watching the color drain from her face. I knew you would never come here just to apologize. I knew you would try to manipulate me. So I turned it on the moment my security team let you up. You just stood in my home and clearly screamed a full, uncoerced confession to grand larceny and financial wire fraud. You stole $200,000 from a legally protected trust fund. That is a major federal crime, Catherine. And I just recorded every single word. Catherine stared at the small, blinking red light next to my espresso machine. The blood drained from her face completely. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She had just handed me a pristine, legally binding confession to grand larceny and financial wire fraud. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She lunged forward, her manicured hands grasping wildly for the recording device on the marble counter. She was desperate to destroy the evidence of her own profound cruelty. Before her fingers could even brush the black plastic, my private security detail stepped out from the hallway. Two massive men in dark suits effortlessly blocked her path. Catherine stumbled backward, hitting the leather bar stool. She looked from the security guards to me, her eyes wide with sheer absolute terror. She finally understood that I was no longer the vulnerable medical school dropout she could abuse and steal from without consequence. I was the chief executive officer of Aegis Health Tech, and I held the absolute power to put her in a federal prison cell right next to her corrupt husband. Escort my mother out of the building, I instructed, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. If she ever attempts to bypass the lobby security again, have her arrested for trespassing. And Catherine, I added, watching her tremble as the guards took her arms. Tell William to pack his belongings. His financial shelter is about to collapse. Catherine was sobbing hysterically as they dragged her into the private glass elevator. I watched the doors slide shut, sealing away the woman who had stolen my future to fund a European vacation for her favorite daughter. I picked up my coffee and took a slow, satisfying sip. The recording was immediately encrypted and backed up to my secure corporate cloud servers. The final piece of my retaliation was firmly in place. Over the next 72 hours, the absolute destruction of my father's medical empire accelerated rapidly. Jamal had stayed entirely true to his ethical obligations. As a brilliant corporate lawyer, he had delivered the forensic audit directly to the federal authorities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation moved with devastating speed. They secured warrants and immediately froze every single one of William's domestic and offshore bank accounts. The massive flow of stolen charity money was entirely cut off. William was trapped in his holding cell, unable to post bail, because the courts deemed his assets the direct product of severe criminal enterprise. Without access to his illicit funds, his entire financial ecosystem imploded. The massive mortgage payments on the sprawling Greenwich mansion were returned due to insufficient funds. He officially defaulted on the property loans. The banks holding the secondary mortgages immediately panicked and looked to offload the toxic residential debt before it became a complete loss. That was exactly when my corporate acquisition team struck. I did not just want to destroy William's hospital legacy. I wanted to dismantle the very foundation of his arrogant high society lifestyle. Using a subsidiary financial branch of my company, I purchased the distressed debt on the Greenwich mansion for a fraction of its market value. I executed the foreclosure clauses hidden deep within his original loan agreements. In less than 3 days, the grand Connecticut estate that my family used to flaunt their wealth legally became my personal property. I was no longer the outcast daughter. I was the official landlord. The following morning, I instructed my driver to take me back to the exact place where this entire sequence of events had started. As my armored black vehicle pulled up the long paved driveway of the Greenwich mansion, I felt an incredible sense of clarity. Just weeks ago, my father had thrown my belongings across this very driveway in a plastic garbage bag. Today, I was arriving in a custom-tailored designer suit, carrying a crisp white legal envelope that held their absolute ruin. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked up the grand stone steps. The front doors were unlocked. The household staff had already fled, knowing the paychecks were going to bounce. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped into the expansive marble foyer. The crystal chandeliers were unlit, giving the massive space a cold, hollow atmosphere. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings. "Is the golden child home?" Footsteps pounded rapidly down the grand staircase. Isabella appeared on the landing wearing wrinkled designer sweatpants and a panicked expression. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she looked completely unhinged. When she saw me standing in the foyer, her face contorted with pure visceral hatred. She had lost her medical license, her wealthy fiancé, and her social standing, all because of the evidence I exposed at the gala. "What the hell are you doing here?" Isabella screamed, gripping the wooden banister so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Get out of this house, Kelsey. You have ruined everything. Dad is in federal custody because of your fake audit, and Jamal will not even answer my calls. You are a monster." I walked calmly toward the base of the staircase, holding up the crisp white envelope. "I am not here to argue with you, Isabella. I am here to deliver a formal document. I am legally serving you with a 24-hour eviction notice." Isabella froze. Her eyes darted from my face to the white envelope. She let out a harsh, disbelieving scoff. "An eviction notice? Are you actually insane? This is my house. Dad promised this estate to me. You have absolutely no legal right to be standing on this marble floor. I will call the police and have you arrested for breaking and entering." I smiled, sliding the legal document onto the polished entry table. "You should really learn how to read financial records, Isabella. When Jamal froze your father's bank accounts, your parents defaulted on the massive mortgages keeping this estate afloat. My company purchased the outstanding debt from the bank yesterday afternoon. I foreclosed on the property. This mansion legally belongs to Aegis Health Tech. You are officially trespassing on my corporate property." The reality of my words hit her with devastating force. She stared at the eviction notice, her chest heaving with erratic, shallow breaths. The grand illusion she had lived in her entire life was shattering right in front of her eyes. She was no longer the wealthy medical royalty of Connecticut. She was a disgraced, unemployed fraud about to be thrown out onto the street. "You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever cheap items you actually purchased with your own clean money," I stated, keeping my tone utterly devoid of sympathy. "The rest of the assets in this house, including your luxury vehicles and the expensive artwork, will be liquidated to repay the charity funds your father stole. Do not try to take anything that does not belong to you. My security team will be inspecting your bags on your way out." Isabella let out a blood-curdling scream of absolute fury. The sound tore through the empty mansion like a physical weapon. She refused to accept defeat. Her profound arrogance and deeply ingrained entitlement completely overrode whatever remained of her logical brain. She stomped her foot against the hardwood landing, her face turning a vibrant shade of purple. "No," Isabella shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are not taking my home. I am the golden child. I am the one who went to medical school. I am the one who actually matters. You are just a pathetic college dropout who got lucky with computers. I will never let a failure like you take my property. I will burn this entire house to the ground before I let you kick me out." I watched her completely lose her grip on reality. Her desperate tantrum was exactly the kind of behavior my parents had enabled and rewarded for 29 years. But I was not our mother. I would not coddle her toxic outbursts. "Burning down my corporate property would be a severe federal crime," I pointed out, casually checking my watch. "And considering you are already under investigation for medical billing fraud, I highly recommend avoiding arson charges. Just pack your bags, Isabella." She turned around and sprinted down the hallway toward the master bedroom, slamming the heavy oak doors shut behind her. I heard the loud mechanical click of the deadbolt sliding into place. She was actually barricading herself inside the mansion, throwing a literal temper tantrum to avoid facing the consequences of her own actions. "I am calling 911, Isabella screamed from behind the locked doors, her voice muffled but filled with manic desperation. "I am telling them a deranged intruder broke into my house. I am telling them you are threatening to kill me. They will arrest you, Kelsey. They will lock you up, and I will get everything back." I waited completely still outside. I waited outside the master bedroom, listening to Isabella's frantic lies. She cried to the dispatcher, fabricating a narrative where I was an intruder attempting murder. She manipulated reality to avoid accountability. I checked my watch, waiting for the authorities. 10 minutes later, police sirens echoed through the affluent Greenwich neighborhood. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the crystal chandeliers in the grand foyer. Heavy footsteps pounded against the stone steps before the front doors were violently pushed open. 4 police officers rushed into the mansion, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. They expected to find a dangerous hostage situation. I walked calmly to the top of the staircase, looking down at the officers. I kept my hands full, maintaining a relaxed posture. "Good morning, officers," I said, my voice projecting steady authority across the marble room. "There is no emergency here. I am the legal owner of this property, currently executing a lawful eviction notice." Before the officers processed my statement, the bedroom doors burst open behind me. Isabella sprinted out, throwing herself down the stairs in a theatrical display of sheer terror. She collapsed onto the marble floor at the feet of the police, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her designer sweatpants. "Arrest her!" Isabella shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger up at me. "She broke into my home. She threatened to burn the house down with me inside. She is a dangerous psychopath who dropped out of medical school. Lock her up right now, please." The lead officer looked between my calm demeanor and Isabella's chaotic meltdown. "Ma'am," he said, looking up at me, "we received a frantic call about a violent home invasion. Please step down the stairs slowly and present your identification." I walked down the sweeping staircase, handing my identification to the lead officer. As he began reviewing the paperwork, the heavy front doors swung open. William stumbled into the foyer, looking completely broken. He wore a wrinkled gray suit, looking exhausted. His attorneys managed to secure him an emergency release on bond, awaiting his formal federal indictment. William took one look at the police officers, at Isabella crying on the floor, and at me standing tall and composed. His arrogance instantly flared up, masking his profound legal desperation. "Officers, what is the meaning of this?" William demanded. "I am Dr. William, the chief of surgery at Kensington General Hospital. This woman is my estranged daughter, Kelsey. She is deeply mentally unstable. I want her removed and charged with criminal trespassing immediately." The lead officer looked at the property deed in his hands, then back at William with a distinct expression of confusion. "Sir, this deed clearly states that the property was legally foreclosed upon and purchased by a corporate entity named Aegis Health Tech. This woman claims to be the authorized representative." "That is a fraudulent document," William roared, his face turning a vibrant shade of purple. "She is a computer hacker. She fabricated those papers to steal my estate. I demand you arrest her right now. Do you know who I am? I will have your badge for this sheer incompetence." Isabella scrambled to her feet, standing behind her father for protection. "She is a liar and a thief," Isabella added, her voice dripping with venomous spite. "She ruined my wedding, and now she is trying to steal my inheritance. Put her in handcuffs." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. The situation escalated into a complex civil dispute regarding high-value real estate. The lead officer handed the paperwork back. "Miss, we cannot verify the authenticity of these corporate documents on the scene," he stated firmly. "I must ask you to vacate the premises until property ownership is resolved in a formal civil court." William let out a loud, triumphant laugh. "You heard the officer, Kelsey?" He sneered, his eyes flashing with malicious delight. "Get your trash out of my house. You are nothing but a pathetic dropout, and you will never take what belongs to my golden child." I did not move a single inch. I simply smiled, a cold, calculated smile that caused William's triumphant laughter to falter. I was not worried about the local police asking me to leave. I was waiting for my backup to arrive. Right on cue, the distinct sound of heavy tires crushing gravel echoed from the paved driveway outside. A massive jet-black armored SUV pulled up directly behind the police cruisers. The sheer size and imposing presence of the vehicle commanded the attention of everyone standing in the grand foyer. The rear doors swung open simultaneously. 4 men wearing tactical gear and dark windbreakers stepped out of the vehicle. Bold yellow letters clearly identified them as United States Federal Marshals. They moved with absolute precision, securing the perimeter. The local officers immediately stepped back out of profound respect for the federal agents securing the massive front doors today. Exactly. Then the front passenger door opened. Jamal stepped out of the armored vehicle. He wore a tailored navy blue suit holding a black leather briefcase. Jamal was a brilliant African-American corporate lawyer who spent his entire life upholding strict ethical standards. 2 weeks ago, he walked away from Isabella's toxic deceit, resigning as external counsel for Kensington General Hospital. Today, he walked back into the battlefield completely transformed. Isabella gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in pure shock. "Jamal," she whimpered, her voice cracking with sudden desperate hope. "You came back for me. I knew you would realize the truth. Tell them, Jamal. Tell the police she is a crazy liar who forged those fake bank records to destroy our family." William puffed out his chest, looking at his former future son-in-law. "Finally, someone with actual legal sense has arrived," William declared loudly. Jamal explained to these local officers that this corporate deed is fabricated and demand they arrest this psychotic woman. Jamal did not look at Isabella. He did not acknowledge William's arrogant demands. He walked straight up the stone steps past the federal marshals and entered the grand foyer. His dark, intelligent eyes swept across the room, taking in the pathetic display of entitlement and desperation radiating from my family. Jamal stopped directly in front of the lead police officer. He opened his heavy leather briefcase and retrieved a thick stack of documents stamped with official federal seals. "Good morning, officers," Jamal said, handing the documents to the policeman. "I am a senior corporate attorney. You hold certified federal seizure warrants and property deeds executed by the state Supreme Court this morning." The lead officer reviewed the heavy federal documents, his eyes widening as he recognized the undeniable legal weight of the seals. Isabella stared at Jamal in sheer horror. "Jamal, what are you doing?" she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. "Why do you have those papers? You are supposed to be my lawyer. You are supposed to be protecting my legacy." Jamal finally turned his gaze toward Isabella. His expression was completely devoid of warmth. "I was never your shield, Isabella," he stated coldly. "I am a man of the law. I do not protect individuals who steal from pediatric cancer charities. My ethical obligations have always been to the truth." William stepped forward, his face contorted with vicious rage. "You ungrateful traitor," William hissed, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. "I gave you access to my elite social circles. I brought you into my family, and you betray me by helping this dropout. I will destroy your entire legal career." Jamal did not even flinch at the empty threat. He stood perfectly tall, an unshakable pillar of integrity against a crumbling empire of corruption. He turned back to the local police officers, gesturing respectfully toward me. Officers, Jamal said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. The federal documents you hold clearly verify this entire estate is now the sole lawful property of Aegis Health Tech. The only trespassers standing in this foyer today are William and Isabella. Please escort them off my client's property immediately. William and Isabella froze, completely paralyzed by the devastating reality of Jamal's words. My client William repeated, his voice cracking with pure disbelief. He looked back and forth between Jamal and me. What do you mean, your client? I stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the brilliant corporate attorney who had just delivered the ultimate fatal blow to my father's empire. I believe proper introductions are finally in order, William, I said, smiling coldly as federal marshals moved in to assist the local police. Jamal is no longer your external corporate counsel. Following your federal indictment, Jamal officially accepted a position at a company valuing ethical integrity. He is now the lead executive corporate counsel for Aegis Health Tech. He works for me. Isabella let out a devastated wail, collapsing onto the marble stairs as the officers moved in to physically remove them from my property. The eviction was absolute and unapologetic. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan swung open with a loud thud. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, wearing a sharp navy blue tailored suit. Next to me sat Jamal, my lead corporate counsel, projecting absolute, unshakable authority. Across the polished wooden aisle sat my father William and my sister Isabella. They looked entirely out of place in this environment. Stripped of their stolen wealth and evicted from their massive Greenwich mansion, they were now operating on pure, desperate delusion. They had pooled the very last of their borrowed money to hire a sleazy, aggressive attorney named Bradley. Bradley was known around the city for filing frivolous lawsuits and bullying witnesses, but he was the only person willing to take their financially ruined case. William and Isabella were officially suing me for undue influence and corporate espionage. They crafted a completely fabricated legal narrative claiming that I had illegally hacked into Kensington General Hospital to steal their data and frame them for embezzlement. Isabella sat at the plaintiff table, wearing a heavily discounted suit, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. She firmly believed that this courtroom would be the place where she finally reclaimed her title as the Golden Child. She believed the law would somehow punish me for exposing their massive financial crimes. I glanced at Jamal, who was calmly reviewing his impeccably organized notes. As a brilliant African-American corporate lawyer, Jamal understood exactly how these entitled high society men operated. He knew that William was trying to use this frivolous lawsuit as a desperate smokescreen to distract from his own pending criminal indictment. Jamal did not look worried in the slightest. He simply tapped his expensive fountain pen against his legal pad, waiting for the proceedings to officially begin. The bailiff announced the arrival of the presiding official, and Judge Mitchell entered the courtroom. Judge Mitchell was a man in his late 60s with slicked-back silver hair and a deeply arrogant demeanor. He took his seat at the high wooden bench, adjusting his robes with an air of absolute superiority. The moment Judge Mitchell looked down at the plaintiff table, a highly noticeable shift occurred in the courtroom. William sat up completely straight and offered the judge a familiar, confident smirk. Judge Mitchell actually returned the gesture, offering a subtle, knowing nod before opening the case file. I immediately realized what was happening. This was not a random assignment. William had deliberately maneuvered his frivolous lawsuit into this specific courtroom. Judge Mitchell was an old golfing buddy from the exclusive Connecticut country clubs William used to frequent before his assets were frozen. William genuinely thought he had the entire case rigged. He believed his old white boys club connections would override any actual legal evidence I presented. Bradley, the sleazy attorney, stood up first to deliver his opening statement. He aggressively paced in front of the judge, waving his hands to create a theatrical performance. Your Honor, my clients are the innocent victims of a malicious and highly illegal corporate takeover, Bradley declared, his voice echoing loudly. Kelsey deliberately used unauthorized artificial intelligence software to infiltrate the secure medical servers at Kensington General. She manipulated financial records to manufacture a fake embezzlement scandal. She did this out of pure, bitter jealousy, because she dropped out of medical school and wanted to destroy the pristine legacy of her highly successful father and sister. We are asking the court to immediately reverse the corporate acquisition of the hospital and return all seized assets, including the Greenwich estate, back to my clients. Isabella nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with manic hope. She leaned over and whispered something to William, who patted her hand with absolute smug confidence. They thought this ridiculous speech was actually working. Judge Mitchell leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. He looked directly at me with blatant disrespect. "These are incredibly serious allegations, young lady," he stated, his tone dripping with condescension. "Corporate espionage is a severe federal offense. I am highly inclined to grant an emergency injunction to freeze your company assets until we can properly investigate these hacking claims. Your aggressive acquisition of the hospital seems highly irregular and deeply suspicious." William let out a quiet, triumphant laugh from his side of the room. He turned his head to look at me, mouthing the words, "You are finished." He was completely convinced that his corrupt relationship with the judge was going to save him from federal prison and restore his stolen empire. I did not react. I simply turned my head and looked at Jamal. It was time to completely dismantle their rigged game. Jamal stood up from his chair. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked confidently toward the center of the courtroom. He did not pace wildly like Bradley. He stood perfectly still, radiating a powerful, commanding presence that instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "Your Honor," Jamal began, his voice deep, clear, and echoing with absolute professional authority. "The plaintiff's claims of corporate espionage are entirely baseless and lack any factual evidence. My client did not hack into Kensington General Hospital. Aegis Health Tech legally purchased 51% of the hospital's toxic debt on the open market. That lawful financial acquisition granted my client full legal access to the hospital's internal financial ledgers. The embezzlement we uncovered was found during a standard legally protected corporate audit." Bradley immediately jumped up from his chair, shouting his objection. "Objection, Your Honor," he yelled, pointing at Jamal. "Defense counsel is trying to legitimize a hostile takeover. They stole my client's property and forced them out of their home." Sustained, Judge Mitchell said quickly, slamming his gavel down with unnecessary force. He glared down at Jamal, his bias completely unprotected. "Counsel, you will watch your tone in my courtroom. I am very familiar with Dr. Williams' outstanding character and his impeccable service to the medical community. I find it highly improbable that he would engage in such financial misconduct. I am going to grant the plaintiff's motion for an emergency injunction against your client." Isabella let out a loud gasp of joy, clapping her hands together. "We won," she shrieked, looking at William. "We are getting the house back." William smirked at Jamal, crossing his arms over his chest. "You should have stayed out of family business," Jamal Williams sneered loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "You picked the wrong side. Now you can watch your client lose everything she stole from us." Jamal did not blink. He did not back down. He looked at the corrupt judge, then at William, and finally at the sleazy opposing counsel. He walked back to our defense table and picked up a thick, heavy manila envelope that was sealed with bright red security tape. He carried it directly to the judge's bench. "Your Honor, before you officially issue any injunctions or make any rulings on this case, I am legally obligated to submit this sealed dossier into the court record." Jamal stated, his voice carrying a lethal, chilling edge. "I must insist that you open it and review the contents immediately." Judge Mitchell frowned, looking down at the red envelope with deep suspicion. "What is the meaning of this, counsel?" he demanded. "I have already made my decision. I do not need to review any more fabricated corporate documents from your client." "I highly recommend you open the envelope, Your Honor," Jamal replied, refusing to step away from the bench. "Because the documents inside do not belong to my client. They belong to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The color instantly drained from Judge Mitchell's face. The word federal struck a profound nerve. He reached out with trembling fingers and broke the red security tape. He pulled out a thick stack of bank statements and printed email transcripts. As his eyes scanned the top page, his entire body went completely rigid. He stopped breathing. William noticed the sudden, terrifying shift in the judge's demeanor. His arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "What is it?" William demanded, standing up from his chair. "Mitchell, what did he give you?" Just rule in my favor and end this. Jamal turned around to face William. His dark eyes were fierce and unyielding. The African-American lawyer stood as a towering pillar of justice in a room tainted by old money corruption. You really thought you could bring us into this specific courtroom and win because you knew the judge, Jamal asked, his voice ringing with devastating clarity. You thought your country club connections would protect you from the law. But you forgot that my forensic artificial intelligence software audits everything, William. It does not just track the money you stole from the Pediatric Oncology Fund. It tracks every single offshore wire transfer you have ever made in your entire life. Isabella shrank back into her seat, terrified by the overwhelming power radiating from Jamal. 3 years ago, Kensington General faced a massive class-action medical malpractice lawsuit. Jamal continued speaking loud enough for the court reporter to transcribe every single word. That lawsuit was mysteriously dismissed by this exact court. We never understood why until my software traced a highly encrypted wire transfer from your Cayman Islands shell company. Jamal pointed directly at the documents trembling in the judge's hands. The sealed dossier I just submitted to the bench contains the undeniable certified proof of that transaction, Jamal declared, delivering the ultimate fatal blow. It contains the exact routing numbers proving that you, William, wired $500,000 directly into Judge Mitchell's offshore retirement account. You bribed this exact judge 3 years ago to dismiss that malpractice suit. And you brought us into his courtroom today thinking he would protect you again. Judge Mitchell dropped the papers as if they were literally on fire. He slumped back in his high leather chair, gasping for air, his corrupt career completely obliterated in a matter of seconds. William let out a strangled, horrified gasp, stumbling backward and crashing heavily into the plaintiff table. He realized he had just walked blindly into the most devastating legal trap imaginable. Before the judge could even attempt to strike his gavel, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom violently burst open. Multiple armed agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters marched into the room, completely surrounding William and Isabella. The final destruction had officially arrived. The silence inside the federal courtroom was absolute. It felt as though the very air had been sucked out of the room the moment Judge Mitchell broke the red security tape on the manila envelope. He stared down at the documents Jamal had just placed before him. I sat at the defense table watching the arrogant posture completely drain from the judge's body. The certified banking records highlighted the exact routing numbers, proving my father William had wired $500,000 directly into the judge's offshore retirement account 3 years ago to dismiss a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. Judge Mitchell dropped the papers as if they were physically burning his hands. His slicked back silver hair suddenly seemed disheveled, and his face turned a sickly shade of pale gray. He looked out across the courtroom, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room. He knew exactly what the presence of those federal banking documents meant. He was not just presiding over a frivolous civil lawsuit anymore. He was staring at this end of his entire judicial career and the beginning of a lengthy federal prison sentence. Your Honor, Jamal said, his voice echoing with devastating clarity, I strongly advise you to carefully consider your next words. You are currently holding certified evidence of your own participation in a federal bribery scheme orchestrated by the plaintiff sitting right across this room. William jumped up from the plaintiff table, his face contorting with panic. Mitchell, what is going on? William demanded, shouting across the courtroom. Just rule in my favor and hold them in contempt. We had an agreement. Throw them out. Judge Mitchell did not even look at my father. He grabbed his wooden gavel with shaking hands and struck it once against the sounding block. The sound was weak and uncoordinated. I am immediately recusing myself from this case, Judge Mitchell stammered, his voice cracking with sheer terror. I am calling an emergency recess. This court is adjourned. He practically fell out of his high leather chair, scrambling blindly toward his private chambers behind the bench. He was running like a coward, desperate to escape the devastating reality of his own corruption. William let out a strangled, horrified gasp. He stumbled backward, crashing heavily into his wooden chair. He realized he had just walked blindly into the most devastating legal trap imaginable. He brought me into this specific courtroom thinking his old country club connections would protect him. Instead, he had delivered himself directly to the slaughter. Before William could even attempt to run toward the exit, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open violently. The loud crash echoed like a thunderclap. Multiple armed agents wearing navy blue windbreakers marched into the room in perfect unison. The bright yellow letters on their jackets clearly spelled out FBI. They moved with absolute military precision, immediately fanning out to block every single exit. William stared at the federal agents in complete disbelief. His entire empire of lies, deceit, and stolen wealth was collapsing right in front of his eyes. William, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and bribing a federal judge. The lead FBI agent announced, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and marched straight down the center aisle. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. No, William shrieked, struggling as two agents grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back. You cannot do this to me. I am the chief of surgery. I am a respected member of this community. This is a complete misunderstanding. My daughter fabricated those bank records to steal my hospital. The lead agent tightened the handcuffs with a loud metallic click. Tell it to the federal prosecutor, he replied coldly. We have been tracking your offshore shell companies for 3 weeks. Your financial footprint is everywhere. You are going away for a very long time. Isabella sat frozen at the plaintiff table, her face completely drained of color. She watched in sheer, absolute horror as her arrogant, powerful father was dragged away in handcuffs like a common criminal. She had built her entire identity on being his golden child, the perfect surgeon who inherited his prestigious medical legacy. Now that legacy was nothing but a criminal enterprise. Isabella tried to stand up, her knees shaking violently. She looked at Jamal, desperate for any shred of protection. Jamal, you have to help us, she pleaded, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. You are a brilliant lawyer. You can fix this. Please, Jamal, I am your fiancé. Jamal looked at her with pure, unfiltered disgust. I canceled the wedding weeks ago, Isabella, Jamal stated, his voice dropping to an icy chill. And I am not a defense attorney for corrupt criminals. I am the lead corporate counsel for Aegis Health Tech, and my only priority is protecting my clients' assets from thieves like you. Isabella let out a devastated sob, covering her face with her hands. But her nightmare was not over. The courtroom gallery had been quietly filling up with spectators during the proceedings. From the second row, two distinguished individuals stood up and walked toward the wooden gate separating the gallery from the courtroom floor. Isabella looked up through her tears, her eyes widening in fresh terror. She recognized them instantly. They were senior representatives from the state medical board. Isabella, the female representative, said, holding a thick official folder. We have received undeniable evidence regarding your participation in systematic Medicare fraud. The emails you exchanged with your father explicitly detailing the inflation of patient billing codes and the falsification of surgical records have been fully verified. Isabella stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. Those emails were taken out of context, she lied desperately. I was just following my attending physician's orders. I am a surgical resident. I save lives. You stole from sick patients to fund your luxury lifestyle. The male representative countered, his tone laced with absolute professional disgust. You violated the most sacred ethical oaths of our profession. Effective immediately, your medical license is permanently revoked. You are stripped of your residency status, and you are permanently banned from practicing medicine anywhere in the United States. Furthermore, we are handing our internal findings directly over to the federal authorities. You will likely be facing your own criminal indictment for healthcare fraud by the end of the week. Isabella let out a blood-curdling scream of pure agony. The reality of her total destruction finally crashed down upon her. She was no longer the golden child. She was no longer medical royalty. She was an unemployed, disgraced fraud who was about to face federal prison time. She collapsed onto the courtroom floor, sobbing hysterically and tearing at her expensive, discounted suit. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, watching the chaotic scene unfold with a sense of profound, icy calm. 6 years ago, they threw me out on the street with a single garbage bag of clothes. They called me a failure and a disappointment. Today, they were the ones losing absolutely everything. I did not feel pity. I did not feel remorse. I only felt the sweet, satisfying weight of total justice. Jamal turned to me, offering a respectful professional nod. "We won," he said quietly. "The hospital is completely secure, and the toxic elements have been permanently removed. You executed this flawlessly, Kelsey." "Thank you, Jamal," I replied, standing up and smoothing down the fabric of my tailored navy blue suit. "But there is one piece of trash left to take out." I walked slowly around the defense table, moving toward the center aisle of the courtroom. As I approached the wooden gallery gates, I saw her. Catherine. My mother was kneeling on the floor near the back benches, looking completely destroyed. Her fake high society facade was entirely gone. She looked old, tired, and profoundly pathetic. When she saw me walking toward her, she scrambled forward on her hands and knees, pulling herself along the carpeted floor. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and clutched the fabric of my designer skirt. "Kelsey, please!" Catherine cried out, her voice cracking with raw, pathetic desperation. "Please, my beautiful girl, you have to help me." The bank took the Greenwich mansion. The federal agents just seized my personal accounts and my cars. I have absolutely nowhere to go. My friends from the country club will not even answer my phone calls. I am going to be sleeping on the street tonight. I looked down at the pathetic woman who had stolen my college fund. I pulled out my designer wallet and extracted a crisp $10 bill. "Take an Uber to a local shelter," I coldly commanded her. "Get out and stay out." Catherine stared at the $10 bill fluttering onto the courtroom carpet. Her manicured hands released my designer skirt as the finality of my words registered. She looked up with hollow, terrified eyes, stripped of the arrogant high society persona she wore like armor. She opened her mouth to beg, but federal marshals were already moving in. They grasped her arms, pulling her up and escorting her out of the gallery. I turned my back on her, walking down the center aisle with Jamal right beside me. We pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight. The toxic anchor that dragged me down was finally cut loose. 6 months passed since that explosive day in federal court. The wheels of justice turned with devastating efficiency, crushing the corrupt medical empire my family built. William did not even try to fight the charges. The forensic audit my artificial intelligence software produced was bulletproof. Faced with undeniable evidence regarding his offshore wire fraud, embezzlement, and judicial bribery, he accepted a brutal plea deal. My father was serving a 10-year sentence at a maximum security federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The man who used to terrorize hospital boardrooms and sip vintage champagne was now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He spent his days mopping cafeteria floors and eating processed food off a plastic tray. His medical license was permanently revoked, his reputation globally destroyed, and his beloved legacy completely eradicated. He had nothing left but the cold reality of his own utter greed. Isabella experienced a spectacular fall from grace. Stripped of her medical license and facing enormous civil fines for her active participation in the Medicare billing fraud, she was rendered unemployable in the corporate world. The wealthy social circles she used to dominate blacklisted her. With her bank accounts frozen and assets liquidated to repay the stolen pediatric oncology funds, my former golden child sister was forced into minimum wage labor just to survive. She worked the graveyard shift at a greasy fast food drive-thru in New Jersey. She spent her nights wearing a polyester uniform, smelling of stale frying oil, handing cheap cheeseburgers through a sliding glass window. Last week, a group of her former surgical residency colleagues pulled up to her drive-through window in a luxury vehicle. Isabella stood there humiliated, taking their food order, while they stared at her in pure pity. The arrogant princess became the ultimate cautionary tale. Catherine fared no better in the aftermath of her family's total destruction. The woman who once threw lavish charity galas and sneered at anyone she deemed beneath her social status was now living in a tiny, cramped studio apartment in a rundown neighborhood. The federal government seized all her remaining assets, claiming they were purchased with the stolen charity funds. She had no savings, no marketable skills, and no wealthy husband to finance her luxurious delusions. Her high society friends blocked her phone number the second the news of William's arrest broke. She was isolated, forced to clip coupons and count loose change just to afford basic groceries. She spent her days sitting in her tiny apartment, staring at the blank walls, consumed by the bitter realization that she threw away her only successful daughter for a fraudulent husband and a disgraced sister. She was living in her own dark personal nightmare. While my biological family paid the ultimate price for their profound cruelty, my life accelerated into a new stratosphere of success. I stood on the sprawling glass balcony of my $50.5 million penthouse in Tribeca, letting the cool evening breeze wash over me. The panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline was breathtaking. Millions of glittering city lights stretched out across the horizon, mirroring the boundless potential of my future. I was no longer the broken medical school dropout, hiding in the shadows. I was a self-made billionaire commanding a powerful artificial intelligence firm. The sliding heavy glass doors behind me opened silently. Jamal stepped onto the terrace holding two crystal glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to me, offering me a warm, respectful smile. The brilliant African-American corporate lawyer had completely transformed his own career trajectory over the past 6 months. After walking away from Isabella's toxic deceit and delivering the fatal blow to William's corrupt empire, Jamal officially accepted the position as my lead executive corporate counsel. He was now my most trusted professional partner. Together, we restructured the entire board of Kensington General Hospital, replacing the greedy executives with highly ethical medical professionals who actually cared about patient outcomes. The hospital was thriving under our new transparent management system, and the Pediatric Oncology Fund had been fully restored with absolute interest. The latest financial projections for Aegis Health Tech just came in, Jamal said, his deep voice carrying immense professional pride. The market valuation algorithms show our company stock rising another 15% by the end of the fiscal quarter. Our new diagnostic software is currently being integrated into 50 major hospital networks across the country. You revolutionized the entire industry, Kelsey. We are saving thousands of lives every single day. I took a slow, satisfying sip from my crystal glass, looking out over the glowing city. We revolutionized it, Jamal, I corrected him gently. You navigated the legal minefields that allowed my software to operate without interference from corrupt traditionalists. We make a truly formidable team. Jamal nodded, leaning his forearms against the glass balcony railing. We absolutely do. Speaking of formidable moves, the legal department just finalized the paperwork you requested for the new philanthropic initiative. The documents are sitting on your desk in the home office, ready for your signature. A genuine smile spread across my face. I turned away from the skyline and walked back inside my pristine, tech-integrated penthouse. Jamal followed me as we entered the massive home office. On the center of my obsidian desk sat a thick leather-bound portfolio. I opened the cover, revealing a stack of immaculate legal documents. This was the final piece of my profound retaliation against a system that had tried to completely destroy my spirit. I picked up my favorite silver pen and hovered the tip over the signature line. I was officially signing a binding corporate resolution to establish a massive multi-million-dollar educational scholarship fund. This financial endowment was not designed for the traditional elite students my father used to champion. This massive fund was strictly dedicated to supporting medical school dropouts who possessed the courage to transition their careers into the healthcare technology sector. I was actively creating an entire generation of brilliant, innovative disruptors. I was providing them with the exact financial safety net and professional mentorship that my cruel parents violently ripped away from me 6 years ago. I transformed my past pain into an unstoppable wave of future innovation. I signed my name with a smooth, confident flourish, permanently locking the multi-million-dollar endowment into place. I closed the leather portfolio, handing it back to Jamal. It is officially done, I stated, feeling a profound sense of absolute closure wash through my entire body. The scholarship is active. Jamal took the portfolio, offering a deep nod of profound respect. This endowment is going to change countless lives, Kelsey. You are giving brilliant people a second chance to redefine their own success. You are proving that stepping off the traditional path is not a failure, it is an evolution. I walked back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling empire of New York City one more time. The reflection staring back at me in the smart glass was a woman of unbreakable strength. I survived years of emotional abuse, brutal financial manipulation, and relentless psychological warfare from the people who were supposed to protect me. They had called me an ugly dropout. They had told me I would never amount to anything. They had thrown my winter coats at me in a garbage bag and demanded that I get out and stay out. I followed their cruel instructions perfectly. I got out of their toxic environment and stayed out of their deceitful lives. I took the garbage they threw at me and used it as the foundation to build an untouchable multi-million-dollar empire. The sweet taste of absolute victory was not just about the immense wealth I accumulated or the luxurious penthouse I now called home. It was about the undeniable fact that I completely dismantled their corrupt legacy while maintaining ethical integrity. The golden child was flipping burgers. The arrogant father was wearing a prison uniform. The elitist mother was counting pennies in a tiny studio apartment. The scapegoat was standing on top of the world, completely free and brilliantly successful. The perfect, satisfying conclusion.